Hi everybody, I'm Hector Garcia, CPA and QuickBooks Pro Advisor. Today I'm going to talk to you about QuickBooks Desktop data efficiency tips. And the reason why I want to do that, because I want to highlight all the great things or remind you, for that matter, all the great things that QuickBooks Desktop has and why QuickBooks Desktop is still king in my world, at least from an efficiency, data entry, data manipulation perspective. There are many QuickBooks Online users. Many of you probably use QuickBooks Online and love it. And granted, QuickBooks Online is great. But if you're using QuickBooks Desktop, I would love for you to maximize its capabilities. If there's anything that I didn't cover or wasn't clear, my email is on the slides, so you can shoot me an email anytime you want to. Okay, now we're going to talk about bank feeds and a vendor import trick. So I'm going to sprinkle in this session a couple of things that you know, a couple of things you may not know, and a combination of tools inside of QuickBooks Desktop that when you see them work together, you might kind of see the big picture about why QuickBooks Desktop is so great and why a lot of people still prefer it over online, specifically because of the ability to use these type of tools in combination. So let's jump right into QuickBooks Desktop. And I am in QuickBooks Desktop 2022, this particular case. So if you're working with an older version, 2020 or older, your bank feeds screen is going to look different than mine, because this bank feed screen, the new updated advanced bank feeds, it's for 2021 and 2022. So hopefully you're working on a newer version that looks just like this. So in this particular screen, I'm in my banking screen. Let's assume I just uploaded January of 2021 onto it for this credit card account. And the first thing you will notice is the transactions were downloaded, but there are no payees. And the reason why there are no payees is because none of these payees have ever been created before. So what you need to do when you're doing bank feeds is come in here and create each payee one at a time. So you have to come in here, create the payee, go to Quick Add, vendor, type it in, and hit OK. Not a big deal. Most of us are used to doing that. The problem is, in my opinion, especially when you do, let's say, a year's worth of transactions, it's going to take you forever to create those payees. So the first trick I want to show you is going to help you speed up the bank feeds process, because you're going to import those payees prior to entering those bank feed transactions. Now, this works best with credit card transactions where the payees are very clearly identified. With banks, it all depends on how banks organize the information. So the first thing that we're going to do is I want you to go into the bank, the same bank that you're using to connect to QuickBooks Online, and I want you to request a CSV file of the bank download. So what you're seeing here on the screen is a CSV file I downloaded from Chase. So that's kind of premise number one. You have to be able to go into the bank and download that CSV file. Next thing you're going to do is you're going to identify which is the column that has the payees. You can sit there and clean the payees if you want to. I recommend doing that afterwards, especially with credit cards. It's much easier to just take that entire payee list, copy and paste it into QuickBooks Desktop. So once you download a CSV file prior, you have that payee list. You're going to go back into QuickBooks Desktop. We're going to click on the list menu. Okay, right here, list. And then we're going to click on add, edit, multiple list entries. So that's probably one of my favorite tools inside QuickBooks Desktop. And that's available in Pro, Premier, Enterprise, Accountant, all the versions, which is really cool. Then under list, we're going to change that from customers to vendors, because that's what we want to do. We want to import those vendors. We're going to click on vendors. Where it says view, we're going to change that from active vendors to unsaved vendors. So basically, these are the ones that we haven't saved yet, that we're in the process of creating new ones and saving. Probably the best option to pick, unsaved vendors. So you're just going to have a blank screen, which is fine. So then I go back into my spreadsheet that I downloaded, the CSV file I downloaded from the bank directly. And then I'm going to copy that entire column that has all the vendor lists. Again, you have to have been able to go to the bank and download that CSV file, secondary to the direct connection to the bank or the .qbo web connect file that you imported into QuickBooks. Then we're going to go back into QuickBooks. Again, we were in list, add, edit multiple list entries. That's how we got into that screen. List edit multiple screen entries. We switched it to vendor, went to unsaved vendors. Then we're going to put the cursor right there on the first box where it says vendor name, just a blank box. We're going to right click on that, and then we're going to click on paste. Okay, so that's going to paste all the things that we copied from the previous CSV file spreadsheet that we have. Okay, don't worry too much about duplicates. Don't worry about messy vendor lists. We're going to talk about how to clean that up afterwards. Right now, we're just going to dump all the vendors in there. Now, I do want to add a note. You can clean this up in Excel prior if you want to, especially if you're doing a whole year's worth. It might be worth it for you to clean them up, delete extra characters, all that stuff in Excel. Just sort them in Excel and clean them up prior. Then I'm going to click on Save Changes. And that's going to save all the vendors in there. It'll give me errors for the duplicates. That's okay. At this point, you don't have to do anything else. Just once it's saved, whatever you need to save, whatever's left in red, just press Escape on the keyboard or hit Close, and you get out of that screen, and then click on No. So I'm going to get out of my banking screen, and I'm going to go back to it one more time. I'm going to go to Banking. I'm going to go to Banking, Bank Feeds, and get into my Bank Feeds again. Banking, Bank Feeds Center. That's where I was before, in the Bank Feeds Center. And I'm going to go back in there, and now we're going to see that the transactions that were downloaded, some of them will start being recognized by the payees that we just entered. As a matter of fact, just like expected, just like Black Magic, you're going to see a whole bunch of vendors recognized. They will all won't be recognized, but they all get automatically recognized. The other thing that you will notice is as the vendors or the transactions get recognized, QuickBooks will start filling in the accounts. Now, I don't ever count on those accounts being accurate, but they're starting to get filled in. So what I'm going to show you at this point is, let's assume that I don't even want to categorize them here. I just want to push them into QuickBooks. So what I can do is I can click on Batch Actions and then click on where it says, let me see, Batch Actions, Add Confirm, and that allows me to add them in batch. Okay, that's an option. If I click here, it says Unrecognized. You will notice that some of them were not recognized. And for the ones that were not recognized, I can click on Select All. Even though the payees were recognized, the accounts were not necessarily recognized. So all these that I don't have the accounts pre-filled for me, again, which could be wrong, we're recognizing that off the bat. I'm going to go to Batch Actions, and then I'm going to click on Modify. So I'm going to go to Batch Actions. I'm going to click on Modify. And then once I do that, and actually I should do all money in and all money out in one shot. So when I clicked on Select All, I'm just going to go ahead and uncheck the payments coming in, right? Because when you modify, it only needs to be for either all deposits or all payments or all credit card charges and all payments or all checks, all deposits. Those two things have to be done separately. So again, we're going to go to Batch Action after I selected them all, and then I'm going to click on that little Modify button that's there. So Batch Actions, Modify, and then under Account, notice I'm not going to change the payee. So the payee is going to stay the way it is. Okay, I'm not going to touch the payee. That payee is already entered in there. All the other information, it's already entered in there. The only thing is I'm going to do Account. So if I have something, if I have an Ask My Accountant account, or I'm going to create one called To Reclass. So I'm just going to create a new account called To Reclass. I'll make it an other expense called To Reclass. And what I'm doing at this point is I am just going to make everything to reclass, and then I'll deal with the classification later, which is kind of the point that I want to make here. So we're batching the vendors in there. They're being recognized automatically. We're picking one account to just dump them in there. I don't even want to be thinking about it. I'm just going to push in the data as much as possible so I can move forward. So at this point, I can click on Add and Confirm and accept all those. Okay, so all the ones that were unrecognized, those 99 transactions that were unrecognized, the vendors were matched because we imported those vendors and we didn't change them in Excel before. This is why I didn't clean them up first. Then we have these two here. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to just modify them and make them to reclass. Again, we could fix that stuff later on, and then I'll save and add to register. And then these are the ones that are recognized. Only challenge with these is that they already are rules being created for it, and there's already categories being created for it. You could accept these. Like some of these are not bad. Like for example, if you look at, let me just remove the memo here for a second and the check number, so we have a little bit more real estate. If you look at Office Depot, that went to office supplies. Publix, which is a supermarket, that went to meals and entertainment. Uber Eats, meals and entertainment. Shake Shack, meals and entertainment. So I didn't do a bad job at categorizing these. If you don't like the way any of these in particularly were categorized, like I'm going to sort by payee, for example, and then I'm going to look at, let's say, a group that I didn't like. Let's say all these spaceport ones, let's say these are all personal. And I didn't like the way these were categorized. What I can do is I could just grab these, select just those by themselves. I can do a shift click on one, hold the shift click, and then I can go to batch actions and just modify those. So I can go to not a match, okay? And that's gonna send them to, that will send them to recognized. So I'll go back and get out of there and come back later. And let's go to bank feeds. So this screen gets refreshed, okay? And it should send them, I don't know where it put them, but it should send them here on recognized. But I'll finish doing these here. And again, if I want to accept them, if I want to change them, I can do that. For now, I'm just going to click on add and confirm, and I'm going to send them all into QuickBooks with the current categories. You could have changed the categories prior if you wanted to. And now the transactions have been added into the register. So now they're in. So I'm going to pull up a profit and loss statement really quick. I'm going to go to reports, company financial, profit and loss standard. And I do want to add that I had a blank file. So the only transactions you're going to see are the ones that I just categorized. So I'm going to do all dates, and notice that some stuff went into the categories that QuickBooks automatically thought they were the right ones, and we didn't modify at that point. We just accepted them as is, okay? And then a whole bunch of stuff went into to reclass. So that was kind of the first step. Now, you could have intervened and categorized them correctly. You didn't have to push them into to reclass, but what I'm doing is I'm setting it up for the next thing I want to show you. So the next thing I want to show you is what happens when you import all those vendors and essentially duplicate vendors were created. So first I do the this step, which is bringing the transactions in there. Second step is I want to clean up my vendor list. Now, if you know how to merge vendors, if you've done that before, you know that the best way to do it is to right click on one vendor, click on edit, and then copy the name of the one that you want to keep, and then go to the second duplicate one. So in this case, it would be this one called Spaceport Ticketing. Let's say that's my duplicate that I want to merge into Spaceport Restaurant. Right click on that, click on edit vendor, and then I'll replace the name and give it the exact same name as the other one. Click on OK, and then it'll ask me to merge. Now I do the merging prior to doing the bank categorization because I want the vendors to be categorized automatically. Nice thing about this is that when those transactions came in, they originally came into two different vendors. Now they're merged and they're all going to the consolidated vendor, which is exactly what we wanted. Now, this takes a long time to do one by one. So what you want to do is you want to leverage the Merge Vendors tool. This was introduced in QuickBooks Desktop Accountant and Enterprise 2020. So you got 2020, 21, 22, or something newer that you're going to see that feature in there. That's going to be under the Accountant menu. So we're going to click on Accountant. And then we're going to go into Client Data Review, and we're going to find Merge Vendors in there. So Accountant, Client Data Review, and then right here at the bottom, it's under Merge Vendors. If you're working with Enterprise and not the Accountant edition, it should be under Company Accountant Tools or something like that. So we're going to go into that Merge Vendors tool, and we're going to show you the same thing I did, but instead of doing copy and pasting, we're going to do this in a much quicker way. So I'm going to sort the vendors by name. I'm going to go find duplicate vendors or vendors are clogging up my vendor list. So let's say we have, let's find some duplicates here. So here's one. And we have Intuit, QuickBooks Online, Intuit Payroll, Intuit QuickBooks, Intuit Payroll. I'm going to call these all Intuit QuickBooks. So I pick the one that I want to keep. So let's say this is the one that I want to keep, the first one. I select all four of them, up to 4 at a time. Then I'm going to click on Next. Then I'm going to pick the first one, which is the one I wanted to keep, or keep the one, whichever one is the one that you want to keep as the one that becomes a permanent record. And then you can either back up and merge, so back up the file prior to a merge, or if you know what you're doing, you can go straight into a merge, click on merge, then click on yes, and then within seconds, now all 4 of those vendors and every single transaction in that vendor. So I'm going to go into it here. So every transaction in that vendor now got consolidated into a single vendor or payee. So that's going to be, again, you don't have to worry so much about creating the add edit tool and create a whole bunch of duplicate vendors. You can go back later on and clean them up. That's why I prefer to do that process. So let's do one more merging of the vendors. So client data review, merge vendors. Okay, so right there, merge vendors under client data review. Okay, and so accountant, client data review, merge vendors. We pick the vendors that we want to merge together. So 2 vendors that are essentially the same thing that was duplicated because I pushed it with the import. So let's say this public says I want to make them all one. So I select all 3 of them. Okay, again, so I'm just picking the vendors that are duplicated. Okay, you can also do a search up here if they don't necessarily have the same starting letter. Then I'm going to go into the next button on the bottom right of the screen. Go to next, and then you have the option to back up and merge or merge. I know what I'm doing, so I go straight into merge. But if you're doing this for the first time, you're welcome to do a backup first. Now I pick the one vendor that I want to keep, the one vendor that's going to be the one that everything gets merged into. Then I click on merge, wait a couple of seconds after I hit yes, and now all my vendors are now one vendor. So if I go back into my vendor list and I'm going to search here for Publix, which is a vendor I just merged, okay, then I have all my transactions for Publix all in one vendor. So the reason why this is so important is, number one, you obviously don't want a messy vendor list, but 2, when you run your reports under company financial expenses by vendor summary, which in my opinion is probably one of the most powerful analytical reports in the world of QuickBooks. So reports, company financial expenses by vendor summary, because that gives you a really nice bird's eye view of all the money that you're spending or where all the money is going. And if you got duplicate vendors in there, starts losing its power, because then you start seeing numbers sort of across multiple vendors. You don't get to see, sort of sort by the biggest number in the top and that sort of thing. So again, you don't want to have SunPass duplicated like you see here, or you don't want to have Starbucks duplicated like you see here. The report loses its power when you see duplicate vendors. So really important. So I'm teaching you how to enter a bunch of vendors in one shot and then how to merge them. And now you kind of see both sides of the coin. Second piece here is when we loaded those transactions in without having to choose the vendors or the payees. I mean, we chose the vendor payees, but we didn't pick the category, is we dumped everything in to reclass. Now remember that because the vendors are loaded, next time you go next month, February, March, April, whatever, some of these vendors will start being recognized automatically, or at least they will be on your vendor list, and you don't have to spend extra time creating one vendor at a time. So it's possible you do this once for a whole year worth of cleanup or data entry, or it's possible that you do this every month, really depending on how many new vendors you will be creating at the same time. Okay. Now, one quick question I have here that I think is worth answering is, what happens if there's transactions before a closing date? So this will allow you to merge vendors even if there's a closing date password, and it will modify retroactively transactions prior to that closing date. So when you're merging forever for every date of every transaction where that vendor's ever been used. It won't separate the pre-closing date vendors as separate vendors or the post-closing date as different vendors. That's why it will ask you to back up prior, because it knows that some people will not keep that in mind and the merging could be catastrophic. Okay. All right. So let's talk about now the reclassification of all those transactions I dumped into reclass. And again, I recommend doing this after you merge the vendors. You will see why. And so I'm going to go into accountant, then I'm going to go to client data review and reclassify transactions. So again, it's under client data review and it's called reclassify transactions. So accountant, client data review, reclassify transactions, that's what we're going to go into, okay? So once we go into that screen, you're going to see a date range. So obviously in this, you have to make sure the date range is accurate. So it covers the period you want to reclass. And then we already created an account here called to reclass. So you see it right there very clearly. It says to reclass and there's $13,000 in there. I make it another expense so it's easier to find. Usually it's going to be all the way in the bottom. Next thing we do to reclass is generally we're going to just sort it by name. So we're going to go into the sorting, click on name, sort it by name. That allows me to select a bunch of transactions at the same time. So I can go in there and I just select all my Apple transactions at the same time, putting checkboxes on them. Unfortunately, on this screen, shift click doesn't work. One of my big pet peeves of this screen, that you can click one, hold the shift key and select a whole bunch. Don't know why, but shift click doesn't work. You still have to click one at a time. So you click a whole bunch of them at the same time. Then you're going to come down here in the bottom where it says account to, and this is where we do our mass reclassification. We go to account to, and then let's say this is going to be office supplies, and simply I hit the little checkbox, pick the new account that I want all these things to be reclassified to, and in one fell swoop, we click on reclassify in the bottom of the screen. You're going to see this is really cool here. Total selected. It lets you know how much is being reclassified prior from you doing that push. We click on reclassify. All the transactions get reclassified in one shot. Now, if your vendors are properly merged, like for example, in this case, notice that I have GoDaddy and GoDaddy Europe. I should have merged those because one of the really cool things about this screen is to filter them by vendor. So I can come in here and put the GoDaddy vendor, right? And then I can select them all in one shot. So I can click on select all. So once I filter by vendor, again, I clicked on name first, and then I selected the vendor I wanted to reclassify to. And then I clicked on select all. So that saved me doing all those little checkboxes. And down here in the bottom, let's say I want to reclassify this to advertising or whatever category happens to be the correct one. Then I click on reclassify. The problem with not having those vendors merged prior, and I'll go ahead and delete that account that's up here in the top, is that I should have a spillover GoDaddy Europe that if I had merged them prior, it would have been part of that filter and it really would have speed up that process. Let's do this Intuit QuickBooks one. So we got Intuit QuickBooks, which have been properly merged. There's a whole bunch of transactions in there. I click on select all, and then I put this into whatever it is. Let's say software cost. I'm going to create a new account called software cost. Make up an account number here. And again, I'm just creating a new account on the fly. You can do that as well in the reclass screen, and then click on save and close. Then I click on reclassify. All those transactions are being reclassed. I find this sometimes to be faster than the bank feed screen. Sometimes I find bank feeds categorization to be faster. It's up to you. You probably want to try both and see which are the ones that allow you to do that. Okay. All right. Perfect. Okay. Perfect. All right. Let's move on to keyboard shortcuts, data entry shortcuts. So this is going to be, in some cases, happens to be my favorite way of teaching how to do manual data entry, because no matter what, no matter how much we try to bring our transactions from the bank, import them from Excel, there's going to be situations where there just isn't enough to warrant an entire setup for batch entry or for data import, and entering by hand is going to be the best choice. So what I want to show you is the best, most optimal way to enter transactions by hand. So I'm going to go ahead and open up my chart of accounts, and I'm going to double click on any of the bank accounts or credit card accounts that I want to use for manual data entry. So let's just create a new, I'm going to create a new credit card account. I'm going to do the same one just so I can show you by actually doing manual data entry. So we're going to call it Chase 3715, save and close, and then hit no. And then I'm going to double click on that so I get into my check register. Now I'm also going to make this a little bit smaller, and then I'm going to go in there and put my spreadsheet on the right-hand side and my QuickBooks on the left-hand side. Generally, in your world, you probably will have 2 monitors, so it won't look like this. It would be across different monitors, but I'm trying to emulate this on the webinar, on the video recording, as good as possible, so you can follow along as if you had 2 monitors, right? So I'm going to enter the transactions by hand. So generally, one of the things I do want to do is I want to always sort, whichever way I'm doing the transactions, I want to sort them by date, because I do want to try to go in sequential order. It's typically the best way to do it. So I'm going to go in sequential order in this particular case, and I'm going to enter all these transactions. So right here on the right-hand side, it's my spreadsheet, my bank statement, my printout, my second screen, wherever I have my transactions. And on my left side, it's just my regular good old QuickBooks that I'll be using to do manual data entry. I'm also going to move the left navigation bar to the top so we can focus our attention all the way to the left as we enter the date. Second tip I'm going to give you is I usually like doing data entry as a one-liner. So you're going to see all the way in the bottom, you're going to see one line, okay? I like doing one line. There's one really fast way to get to one line, which is Alt-1. So you press Alt-1 on the keyboard. Now, why Alt-1, or how do I remember Alt-1? Well, the 1 has a highlight under it. Anytime you see anything in QuickBooks or in any Windows application that has something highlighted under it, that means that you can activate that with your keyboard shortcut using the Alt. So Alt-1 on my keyboard will switch from regular mode to one-liner mode. I think for data entry purposes, one line is the best. Okay, so let's now enter some of the transactions. We'll start with 12, 27, 2020. So the first thing to do is I'm going to type 122720. I want you to pay attention to that tip. I am not doing 12/27/20, or I'm not putting 2020. I'm doing 6 digits and 6 digits only. And the reason for that is because I want to do it faster. And that's what I'm teaching you, okay? So we're going to do 6 digits, no slashes. Then we do tab, reference number, leave blank, tab, payee. Here's where we're going to type our payee name. So in this case, I happen to have my vendor name here in my list. So I can just start typing, hit down on the keyboard, down arrow, that will select the payee that I want. Again, remember, I imported these prior, right? I'm going to hit tab. Then I pick my category, let's say it's meals and entertainment. Then I hit tab. Then I go 78.56. Then I go tab, 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 and that saves the transaction. So you kind of want to get used to just the cadence of your tabs. So next transaction, QuickBooks will automatically, depending on your preference, will automatically show the next transaction as the last transaction that you created. I do want to show you that preference because not everybody has that preference set up. We're going to go to the edit menu first, and then we're going to go into preferences. So edit menu, preferences, and there's a very specific preference where you tell QuickBooks Desktop how you want it to manage date entering. So right now, the default date for new transactions is the last date used. You always want to do this when you're doing batch manual data entry because the probabilities that you'll be creating transactions that are sort of back-to-back next to each other, okay? You want to do that, right? In the regular world, when you're not doing back-to-back data entry, best thing to do is select the option to default to today's date because most users forget about dates and most transactions entered in real time are today's transactions. So it's kind of a dichotomy here. It's a chicken and egg situation. Which one should I use? So when you are going into doing batch data entry like the way I'm doing now, you come back and you switch it to last enter date. When you're done, you go back into your preferences and switch it to today's date. That would be my best practice to use. Perfect. Next transaction has the same date. Tab, tab, type Chick-fil-A. There it is. One vendor because I cleaned it up prior, hopefully. tab, then we go into meals and entertainment, whatever category happens to be, tab, 31.85, tap, 3 times. That saves the transaction. I'm gonna skip over to this one here called Sweet Blends because I want to show you how to change the date for a date change. So most of you will go, okay, Hector, we understood what you told me. What I'm going to do is I'm gonna press 122820 and hit tab, and that's going to skip to the 28th. That is a good idea. I actually don't have any qualms with that. The thing is that generally, when you are just going to go up 1 date or 2 dates, what you want to do is you want to let the date automatically come in and then just press plus on your keyboard. So when you're on a date, when you hit plus on your keyboard, and I'm going to hit plus a whole bunch of times, and again, I just have the cursor right there on my date. So the cursor is just sitting there. I hit plus on my keyboard and it will go up 1 date. I hit minus on my keyboard and it will go down 1 date. So as you're doing data entry, you're going to find yourself just plussing 1, plussing 2 times, many times. So the next one here is Sweet Blends. And the default category for this, let's say, is owner's equity or shareholder distribution, or I don't know what the equity account is called in this QuickBooks file. Let's do shareholder distribution. Okay, so I'll just create the equity account really quickly. Again, you can create those accounts on the fly and then enter that transaction 11.02. Tap, enter. Last thing I want to show you on this screen is the process of what's called default accounts. So this is different than bank feeds where you create rules, but you can create default expense categories. So for example, I'm going to go into my vendor list. So I'm going to go into Vendor Center, and then I'm going to search for Target, and I can double click on Target, and I can go into where it says account settings, and in here I can put office supplies and hit OK. And then let me go to the other Target, which should have been merged, by the way. Merging those vendors would have saved me doing this twice. So I set up Target as a default category. I'm going to go to Publix, okay, search Publix, which is a supermarket, and I'm going to edit that, and I'm going to go into account settings. Again, that's in the vendor edit menu, account settings, and then we're going to pick the default category. Let's say that one is shareholder distribution, and then we hit OK. So if you set up those accounts prior, then when I come in here and I create, let's say, this Target transaction, okay, QuickBooks will automatically put in the default category, which is a really awesome, beautiful thing. It does take a little bit longer because I have to go into my vendor list and add those default categories. And unfortunately, there's no way to import this, to set them up in Excel and import them. Otherwise, I would have shown you how to do that for sure. But that's going to just speed up that process of 69.80, tap. Let's do the next one, which is a Publix. I hit plus on the keyboard to go up 1 date, tap, hit Publix, tab, automatically goes to shareholder distribution. It's a beautiful thing. Hit tab and then do 221.88, tap. So that's the whole set of tools that is in here. Now, let's say you wanted to quickly add a note to a transaction. Let's say that Barnes & Noble's transaction. So I'm going to go to Barnes & Noble's, and then I'm going to put here office supplies, but I want to put somewhere in the memo that this was a particular book, right? Or whatever it happens to be, or a gift for a client or a book for an employee. I want to put that somewhere. When I'm in a one-line mode, I don't get the memo. So because I like one-line mode for data entry, it feels so much faster. I'm going to remember to do Alt-1 to open that up, hit tab a couple times to get to the memo. I hit tab way too many times. So we're going to hit tab a couple times to get to the memo. We're going to put here a book for John, whatever it happens to be. And then I can Alt-tab to go backwards or tab to go forward and put whatever dollar value we're going to put in there, which is $6.96. Tab, enter to save it. Again, Alt-1 goes back to one-line mode. Alt-1 opens it up, which gives you access to that memo. So if I want to quickly edit the Target one to put that I bought, I don't know, some ink, I go up arrow with my keys, hit tab, 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 sit on the dollar amount, tab, then go to Alt 1, then I go to tab, memo, and then I put ink for printer. And then if I need to go back, I go Shift tab. If I need to go forward, just tap a couple of times until it saves and press enter. So that's what I want to show you, because you will, no matter what, no matter how much you try to automate everything and import everything, you will at some point do extensive amounts of manual data entry. How do I enter a class in here? So unfortunately, there's no way to enter class in here unless you do what's called a split. And if you can see here in the bottom, it says splits, and there is an S highlighted. So that means that you hit Alt S. So do Alt S on the keyboard, and then I have opened up for a customer job or for a class. So if I do want to enter a class that wasn't there on the first line, the solution was to do the Alt S, okay? And then hit yes. So I'm just gonna double click on the transaction here so you can see what that looks like with the class entered. And there is the class right there. So if you want to add customer job, class, or billable or line item memos, you're gonna do Alt S and open that up, and you'll be able to do that as much as you want. Again, I do like this screen for manual data entry and for avoiding potential duplicates. However, we have batch enter, probably the best thing that's ever come out of the QuickBooks developers is this tool. This tool, it's just amazing, okay? So I'm gonna go into Accountant. I'm gonna go into Batch Enter Transactions. It's right there, it's the third option there under Accountant. So we're gonna go to Accountant, go to Batch Enter Transactions. If you're in QuickBooks Enterprise, that's gonna be under Company. So Batch Enter Transactions, and this only works when you have the data in Excel prior. So in this particular case, I'm gonna go into credit cards and credit card charges because I happen to have that spreadsheet. I'm gonna open this up here, okay? And we're gonna do the same thing we did with the check register, but the difference is that we are going to copy and paste the transactions in there. Now, a couple of things that becomes a little bit confusing is the whole usage of positives and negatives. So in this screen, all the natural transactions need to be a positive number. So my spreadsheet, I'm gonna go into my spreadsheet here. My spreadsheet by default is showing charges as negatives and deposits as positives, but that's not the natural way. So the natural way would be charges as positives and credits or payments to the credit cards as negatives. So I have to convert that first. Let me zoom this in so you can see that. Okay, so what I'm doing is I'm gonna do equals, select the cell, and then multiply it times -1, or I can do the negative version of the value. Press enter, and let's zoom back out to normal. And then I'm just going to click and drag that all the way down here. Okay, and then I can copy this and paste it as values right on top of the existing stuff, delete the other stuff, and now I have them the way I want them. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take date, payee, and amount, and I'm gonna arrange my batch enter to look exactly like that. So let's go back into the batch enter, and then I'm going to make sure that this is date. Again, we're making sure that this matches. So I need to move amount to be right after payee, right? So I'm gonna move amount, go to move up. Okay, so we're gonna click move up here to change order for it. Move up, and now we have date, payee, and amount. It's a beautiful thing. Click OK. Then I can take all this information and we can copy and paste it from here into batch enter. So right click and paste, batch enter. Now, because my vendors were already imported, and you would use the same importing tool that I told you earlier, import the vendors first. That way you don't get these little reds. This little reds is when the vendors are missing. All you have to do is click on it, hit tab, quick add, and OK. And then go down to the one that's duplicated. So there's another red here. Click on it, hit tab, enter, enter. Go to the next one. If there's any other reds, click on it. Click on it, hit tab, enter, enter. Now, if you know that these vendors are supposed to be something else, not that I want to create a new vendor, then don't do that. Then go to that red vendor that's there, hit cancel. Don't try to replicate it, and then type in there the one that you want to fix it to. So that's just a little nuance there that you need to possibly may need to choose the right vendor. Otherwise, if you create a vendor, you have to go back and merge again. That's why I showed you that. So once you did the copy and paste into batch enter, the next big decision you have to make is, well, do I go in there and start categorizing these? You can. I can go and categorize each one, right? So I go one by one and I can start categorizing. The problem with batch enter is it won't automatically pre-fill the expense category based on a previous transaction. It won't do that, and it won't do it based on the vendor default. So this would be a manual process for sure, to have to select each one by one. Not too difficult, just hit tab and start selecting what you want. Hit tab, start selecting what you want. Notice, look, I'm doing this really fast. I'm not even using my mouse. I'm just using tab, or shift tab to recognize them all. That's one way of doing it. I'm actually going to click save and just save those, the ones that had categories. And the ones that don't have categories, guess what? I can use the same technique I used before. Go to reclass, right click on that, click on copy down. Yes, I love that. Copy down is one of my favorite things in the QuickBooks world, only available in some screens. So we go to copy down, click on save and close, click on yes. Everything is saved in one fell swoop. And then I go back into my reclassify screen. And let's change this back to the right vendor name. Then I can go to my reclassify screen and reclassify the ones that I set up to reclass. Again, the difference is that when I go back into my check register, right? When I was in the check register, I could have potentially seen if there was a duplicate and prevent that from being entered. If I use batch enter, I don't get visibility over what's there now. And as you can tell, there's a couple of duplicates right there at the beginning because I entered those by hand first and then did the batch enter. So in order to avoid that, the check register works. So if you're going to use batch enter, just don't use the check register at all because it will create some confusion. One thing I recommend, just a little quick tip here. When you do a batch enter, most people batch enter based on date, the way I did it. I prefer that you resort by payee in your Excel and then batch enter with the payee as the sorting mechanism. That way, when you have a whole bunch of transactions, they're essentially the same vendor, you can change them much quicker because they're all under each other. That way, you're not sort of switching back and forth. So I want to make sure that you're hyper aware that in the slides, I put a YouTube video link to batch enter transactions. It's about 20-minute long video because you do want to get all those nuances. Obviously, in a webinar, it's difficult to get into high level of detail. And I do have a couple of slides in which I kind of highlight why people like QuickBooks Desktop over QuickBooks Online. I will give you what I think is sort of the difference. In QuickBooks Desktop, you got the Add Edit tool that allows you to import vendors. We talked about that. You got IIF import, which we didn't chat about, but it could save you a lot of time if you know how to use that correctly. You got the copy and paste batch entering. You got the merge vendor, which I didn't put in the slides, and batch delete, which we didn't cover. Where QuickBooks Online wins, in my opinion, is the entire bank feed system is just better. Some banks allow you to download bank statements inside QuickBooks Online. It's got easy third-party integration. There's an awesome uncategorized transaction accountant client collaboration tool and tags, which QuickBooks Desktop doesn't have. If you want to learn more about the differences between QuickBooks Desktop and QuickBooks Online, one of the slides has my big, huge matrix. It's got like 200 and something lines worth of transactions where I compare feature by feature across all versions. Check out the video resource, and there's my email. I love QuickBooks Desktop. We'll continue to do so. Hopefully, I convince you that QuickBooks Desktop is still king.